Is there a little bit of space next to me? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Sip and Knit podcast. My name is Sarah of Sarah Corrine Knits, and you can find me on Instagram as @StitchInThe6 and on Ravelry as Sarah Corrine. So, welcome. It's been about 3 weeks, and that's for, I guess, kind of obvious reasons. The holidays went on, and my family and I, we celebrate Christmas, so it was just sort of the weeks leading up to Christmas are always, we'll say, hectic. And so, I spent a lot of time hanging out and knitting, but also a lot of time wrapping and shipping presents and grocery shopping and planning for a holiday. And although the holiday was a little bit different than how I would usually celebrate it, it was still very lovely and rejuvenating. And yeah, I'm pleased to be here sitting with you all to discuss just that, what I knit over those 3 weeks, what I watched. I'm gonna do a little bit of a segment about content, television, movies, that sort of thing that I've been really enjoying, and just sort of spend some time with the internet, with my knitting internet friends. So without further ado, let's get into what I am drinking. This is the Sip and Knit podcast after all. If you're new here, welcome. Join me with tea, coffee, wine, hard liquor, whatever your brand of choice is. Today for me, it's going to be tea. Last episode, you know that I filmed around like the 5th of December, and I had some massive issues with getting things uploaded to YouTube. It took like 4 days when it should have taken an afternoon. So I'm refraining from saying the days of the week that I plan on putting episodes up or that I'm filming on, so as not to like confuse the fact that I was planning on uploading on a Monday, but actually it's a Thursday. So just know it's not December 22nd. But this is the Bird and Blend Tea Advent from this year, from 2021. This is day 22. If for whatever reason you're behind on your Advent or I don't know, you just haven't had the chance, and you still don't want it spoiled, then just skip ahead about 30 seconds or so. But this is the dark chocolate chili chai. It's a black tea, and it says for all of them, like whether or not you should have it with milk or how long you should brew it, that sort of thing. And it is Sri Lankan black tea, cocoa nibs, cocoa shells, cardamom, cinnamon, ginger, chili, and natural flavoring. My partner had this one already, so I'm having the second bag of it, and it's really delicious, and it actually is quite chocolatey, which I thought was interesting. I'm just gonna pull this pillow out from behind me. It's a little bit pushing me a little too far forward. It's really chocolatey, which I really enjoyed, and I have steeped it in this like David's tea vessel because I want more than my cup will allow me to have. So I'm just gonna plop some of that in there. I have a little bit of soy creamer as well as a really small touch of sugar because that's how I like my tea, my black tea anyway. And this is in my Jorhaus Wild Mount mug, which if you don't know what Critical Role is, you'll have no idea what this is, but this is from season 2, a place that they went in Wildemount, which is within Exandria, the world of Critical Role. And this was a gift that I got from my partner for Christmas. It has this really delicate pink rim on the top, and then like the purple, and it's meant to be like a camping mug. And it says around it, it says ground zero for the calamity. And then it says home of dangerous creatures. And the box that it came in said beware of rocks and rocks, which rocks, R-O-C-K, like a boulder rock. And then rocks like R-O-C-S, because that's like a giant bird creature in D&D that you could potentially get attacked by. Because D&D. So that's what I'll be drinking today. It was just brewed, and it's still very hot. So I'm gonna take a moment before I take a sip. But yeah, without further ado, get yourself a beverage, sit down with your knitting, join me while I talk about finished objects, works in progress, a little bit of new cast on goodness. And yeah, then we'll just sit and chat for a little bit while I knit on a project. And yeah, that's kind of the plan for today. So what I would like to discuss first is what I'm wearing, just so that you don't have to wait and wonder if I'm gonna talk about it. So this shawl, and I'm gonna kind of pull at it. This shawl is a big triangle shawl. It's very long, but not super deep. And it's knit with 2 different colors of fingering weight yarn, a variegated and a solid. I chose to go with a superwash and a non-superwash for no reason other than I already had this in my stash, this pink, and this color went really well with it. And I didn't really think about the superwash, non-superwash concept, but at the end of the day, I've blocked it and worn it multiple times, and it's not like I'm throwing it in the washing machine. So to me, didn't really bother me that I sort of mixed with the bases. Hey Murs, what are we barking at? You can't come in here. There's a big tripod. Can you lie down? No. Can you go lie down? No. Hey babe, can you call the dog?
Come here.
Go see mama. Ooh, delicious. Okay, as I was saying, sorry about that. So yes, so this is oh no. It's called the Gather Shawl by Andrea Mowry. I have modified it. Along this edge, which was my cast off edge, there should be more garter, probably about to here, and then multiple stripes of the eyelet lace and garter, like in little stripes, down to about, probably it would have been about this much longer. While I was knitting this shawl, it was so long that I was like, I don't know that I want, because I've already got it wrapped around me twice. So I'm just thinking, like, if I had more, like, yes, this part would be bigger, and so it would sit a little more off my shoulder and probably, I guess, provide more warmth. But ultimately, when I'm wearing it with a coat, it's just getting squished up like this anyway. So I didn't see the reason to continue knitting it, which is sort of how I run my knitting life. I'm sort of very much of the mind that if I don't see the point in continuing, I'm not going to, regardless of what a pattern says. I don't know if you're the same way, but that's just how I keep enjoying what I'm making, because otherwise I'm going to feel like it's a chore versus something that I'm really liking to do. So that is the story there. So this yarn is Crooked Kitchen Yarn Company. She's a Canadian dyer in Ontario, I believe, like the Kitchener, Waterloo area. I could be wrong, but that's from memory. And it is the Mischievous Grin colorway. It's a pale pink with periwinkle purple, maroon, brown, gold, orange speckles. It's chef's kiss, very delightful. I would purchase yarn from her again. It's a treat to work with. I really love her speckles. And then the maroony purple is the Mondim Retrosaria from Retrosaria, or from Rosa Pomar. I always forget what name is the yarn store and what name is the yarn producer. So I'm just gonna say both. Retrosaria, Rosa Pomar, under that umbrella, the Mondim yarn. And it is a colorway that's a number. So sorry, I think it's on my Ravelry page, however, so if you wanted to check that out. This is a very straightforward eyelet lace pattern that I think is about a 6-row repeat, where the back is all, like, you're not doing anything, you're just sort of going across, and then the right side is where you're doing all the stuff. I am not the most confident lace knitter, and so I did mess this up and had to rip back the first lace section, which there's more than one lace section on this. So I will say it is a beginner friendly lace pattern because I was able to do it, and I very much am beginner with lace. But, you know, I would maybe suggest throwing in like a lifeline after your garter section before you go into the yarn overs and stuff, just in case you have to rip back, because you do have to keep with the pattern so that the eyelets are offset rather than all going in one way. They're kind of like honeycombing. And that's what I messed up on. So that's just something that I would mention as like if you want to do this as a beginner lace pattern, totally do it. Just maybe throw in a lifeline. And that's that. I finished this in 2021, I believe. And yeah, that's what I'm wearing today. I don't really have much else to say about it. I don't think. I had about probably nearly 50 grams left of the second skein of the pink color, and then I had about 50 grams of the single skein for this. So in case you're wondering for that, for like amount of yarn, I think technically if I kept going, I would have used much more of this second skein, so it probably is truly a 2-in-1 sort of a situation. Yes, I think that's everything. At this point, I'm just sort of like rambling on about the shawl. I like it. It's pretty, it's pink, it's my colorways, and that's what it is. Without further ado, let's jump in to my finished objects that are recent finished objects, and also count how many times I say today. I think that will be a really fun challenge for us all. Okay, let's get into some finished objects, shall we? Okay, I'm gonna take a big old sip of this. I'm realizing slurping noises for tea might not be the most enjoyable noise for you while I do this, but ultimately it's delicious and I'm thirsty and I'm so sorry. Maybe I'll stick to beverages you can drink out of a straw so that you don't have to listen. Okie doke, let's talk about the thing I'm picking dog hair off of, as per usual. So, the last 2 episodes I talked about this sweater. I was on Ravelry updating this project page, and I hadn't realized I cast it on in August of this year, which this sweater did not take me August, September, October, November, December. It did not take me 5 months to knit. Like, that's not a genuine reflection of how long this garment would take a person. If you are a non-monogamous knitter and a slow knitter and you put it down and pick it back up, like, yeah, it might take you 5 months, but like if you are someone who tends to work on a project before moving on to the next one, this should not take you that long. But it took me that long, and I'll get into why. So this, and I'm gonna do my best to like hold it up so that it's like visible of what's going on. So this is and it's got like a split hem. Split hem like that. Ooh, very pretty. Look at that. So, are we ready for shame? There are ends that have for sure not been woven in, but I'll get there. I'll get there. This is my super simple summer sweater by Joji Locatelli. And it was knit out of not summer yarn. This is the Rosa Pomar Brusca yarn. So it's labeled as either like a DK or a worsted weight. I've seen it listed as both. And it is a woolen spun yarn. The reason I bring that up is because the pattern is written for Rosa Pomar's Mungo yarn, which is a cotton wool blend, and it is a true worsted weight yarn. And I had this already in my stash, so I wanted to make it work, which is, I've been affectionately calling this my super simple woolly sweater because it's knit out of 100% wool versus the wool cotton blend that the sample was made out of. So what I ended up doing was I cast on both the medium and large size, so the second and third size in the pattern, third and fourth size in the pattern. Oh, I don't remember, but in her size chart, it says like the letters for S, M, L, etc. So I cast on the medium and large, had the same cast on stitches, the same instructions for the yoke, etc., until you got to a certain point and you either did more increases or started the short rows for the medium. So what I did was at that point, just before the short rows, I took it off the needles, I put it on some cotton yarn, and I blocked it, and I measured my gauge from that because I was using a different yarn weight, a different yarn content and a different needle size than is suggested in the pattern. The pattern suggests a smaller needle than you would expect for a worsted gauge. I believe it's about a US 6. And I'm comfortable knitting a worsted on like a US 8 or 9. So I did knit this in US 5 for all of the ribbing. So on the cuff and on the hem here, I knit on a US 5. And then the body I knit in a US 8. And what I did was I took it off the needles for the yoke, I blocked it, I laid it flat to dry, and then I measured in multiple spots what I was getting stitches per inch for, and I ended up at about a 3.5 to 4 stitches per inch gauge, which meant that I needed to go and stick with the medium size and not continue to the large size, which I'm very happy that I did, because you'll see this sweater, I don't even know if it's gonna fit all in frame. It's quite wide. I'm a 42-inch bust, and I haven't measured across yet, although I will. Let's do that, shall we? I have my little notions tin here. It's from Small Batch Designs, Firefly Notes. So it's like this alpaca tin. It's very cute. And it has like a magnet on the bottom to like keep all your stuff from like going all over the place. Do recommend things with magnets. They're a great time. So let's see, can I do this sitting down? Not super accurately, but I can get an idea. So this is, we need to put like elevator music in while I do silly things like this on the podcast. 26 times 2 is 52. Yep. So it is about a 52-inch bust, which gives me 10 inches of positive ease. I don't know if that's accurate because I didn't lay it down, but it's give or take properly that width, because it is quite loose. And when I tried it on before blocking, when I had finished it, it was fitted. Like, it was probably just about my bust size, if not about a 44. And the sleeves were here and like could not go any longer. After blocking, this is no longer cropped, it's loose fitting, and the sleeves go down to my wrists. So that's why I mentioned having put it on spare yarn and blocking it, and why I mentioned it's woolen spun, and why I mentioned it's 100% wool, and it's non-treated, so it's non-superwash. All of these things factor into the finished garment that I ended up with. And it's a finished garment that I am obsessed with. Like, I wore it all day Christmas Day, and I think I wore it the day before too. Like, I wore it for like 2 days straight, basically. I'm really, really loving the fit of this garment. And I think the reason for that is that I went loose gauge, I say loose gauge, for the yarn that it is. I knit this on a US 8, and I probably should have, again, this is all relative to what knitting is for you and you only. So you get to decide how you want to do it. But I basically knitted on a needle that was probably bigger than intended. And the gauge that I got was probably larger than intended. But what that means is I have this extremely lofty, extremely light, extremely comfortable sweater. I wore it indoors for a whole day and did not get too hot once. I think at the end of the night, after I had like 2 glasses of wine, I was like, okay, we're warm, we need to take this off. And that's like saying something because I run hot. So that was kind of really eye-opening to me. And this is the first time I've ever knit something with 100% non-treated, like woolly wool. That's what I would call this, is like a toothy, rustic wool. And it was at times like almost toothy to the point of being uncomfortable to knit with. Like, I tension my yarn. Let's see if I can get an example here. We'll use this out of my sock bag. I tension my yarn by going over my ring finger and then over my index finger, and I use my index finger to knit along. So my ring finger was like taking and wrapping this yarn around that finger, and I found that like at times I'd have to like untension it and almost just like go my first time I ever learning to knit sort of a way with like throwing it over, because this would like almost get like, not rug rash, that is a over exaggeration of what was happening, but just like that small like red irritation where I was like, oh, that's uncomfortable now. That's how like scratchy this wool was. And now it's like, it's a great time. Like I didn't wear it next to skin. I wore just a short sleeve t-shirt under it, but I probably could just wear it with just like my undergarments and be fine. So if you're ever worried about, this is turning into a really long explanation about the sweater. I just love it. I don't know. If you're ever worried about knitting with wool like this, I highly recommend, and actually, I saw Chevy from Chevrel's Stuff do this, or Chevris from Chevrel's Stuff. That's, I think, the way that it is. She knit with this, and what she did was she bought 2 colors of it, because it comes in 50-gram balls, and she knit the swatch for the sweater she wanted to knit, and then she knit a hat out of it with like the same motif, just to see if she would like the yarn. And like, I think that's a brilliant way of approaching a yarn that is like maybe a content that you're unsure of, or like a texture you're unsure of, or you don't know how it's going to react after blocking. Like, nothing is more disappointing than buying a whole sweater's quantity of yarn and then finding out that you're not going to enjoy wearing it because it is uncomfortable on your skin. So definitely it's an affordable yarn. I think it's about $6 to $7 Canadian per 50-gram ball, which is really good. You can get it at the Knitting Loft, you can get it at Espace Tricot, and I'm sure many other places. So I guess what this segment of the podcast has turned into is a glowing review for Briska. I will be making sweaters out of it in the future. I actually have 2 balls each of the green and the gray left. I bought them in a panic when I was nearly finished the body, because I didn't know how much, or when I was on the body, because I didn't know how much I was going to need. I finished with just enough of the gray that I already had, and I had 2 balls of that, so 100 grams. And then I just broke into the first skein of the new green, and that was about, so that would have been, what, 100 and probably maybe 20 grams. So what I'm saying is, this is extremely lightweight. It's 200 grams, right? And it's a whole 50-inch bust sweater with nearly, I would say, probably I wouldn't say it's a full body length, but it's also not cropped, so probably more of like a classic sit at your hips sort of a sweater length. I don't know, man. All I'm saying is, if you're unsure about superwash, non-superwash yarn, and you don't know if you want to knit a garment out of it, take this as a sign, my friend. You do want to knit a garment out of it, because it's going to turn out beautiful. Okay, so that's that sweater that I'm like balling up. Let's not do that. My poor baby, you don't deserve it. I did block this, one would say, aggressively. I don't know that that's true. I just sort of like pulled it out to the shape it looked like it wanted to be in. I didn't try to keep it, you know? So if you're worried about like this yarn and you're like, ooh, I knit it at a loose gauge and I don't want it to grow much, it will. So take that, take that into account. Oh no. Ooh. It will. So take that into account when you cast on. What I'm saying is, if you're using that yarn, you should gauge swatch. I know you don't want to hear it. I know you didn't want me to say that, but you should. I don't know what to tell you. Okay. So a little more tea for me. Next is my socks. These I cast on sometime in November, and they are the Knit Picks Felici Psychedelic Sunset. Here we are. I knit these socks with Edible Thoughts makes here on YouTube and Instagram her peekaboo fold over heel or cuff tutorial. So it has this like really cute hot orange sort of pop, a contrast white heel, and then I just knit all the way through to the toe. In hindsight, I would not have knit all the way through to the toe, because I ended up having to use just over 50 grams, and they come in 50-gram balls. I ended up having to use just over 50 grams for each sock. On the second sock, I had to get from the pink to the blue from the second ball, which just means that I can knit contrast cuff, start my socks here and knit a second pair and be perfectly fine. These are 72 for reference. My partner wears a 72 stitch sock. I wear between a 64 and a 68 stitch sock. So what I can do is knit myself like a 64-inch ones and probably get it out of like the 45 grams that I have left over, shorties, and they'll be great. So these are them. Like I said, Edible Thoughts makes peekaboo cuff tutorial. These are Fish Lips Kiss heels. Knit as I went. I don't do afterthoughts. I never have. I will eventually, just to say that I've done it, but this is what works for me. And then I knit the foot, and then I knit, how did I do the toe? I did a slip knit and knit two together every other round until 20 stitches on the needles, like one needle, so 40 total stitches, and then I knit decreases every round. So I guess like a rounded toe is what that would count for until 10 stitches on the needle, and then I bound off using Kitchener stitch. That is basically, if I'm not knitting toe up, how I do socks all of the time. The peekaboo cuff was sort of my trying something new. If I'm knitting socks, I'm at the point where I'm comfortable to knit them without looking at a pattern or anything like that. So every once in a while I throw in something new, so either a new heel or in this case a new cuff. It keeps them interesting. I think for 2022, and this is going kind of harkening back to my podcast last time where I was talking about 2022 plans. And I think that I've realized, like I was just sitting here setting up the podcast and I was thinking, I don't put my socks on Ravelry, like my project socks, for a few reasons. I cast them on and I cast them on with zero plans, and I have no intention of like a date I want to finish them by, or like I said, I'm never really using a pattern. And so that sort of leads me to not documenting my sock knitting. So I don't actually know, because my memory's bad. I don't actually know how many socks I've knit in the year 2021. But what I think it ends up being is roughly one sock a month. So one pair every 2 months. So probably about 6 pairs of socks for the year. And they are my mindless, always have on the needles sort of project that I have when I'm working or when I'm sitting and I don't want to be working on a bigger project, like when I'm sitting watching TV after dinner or something like that. So I think for the year of 2022, mostly because of the existence of this podcast and my intention of sort of documenting a little bit better, what I'd like to start doing is I have a planner coming for this year, and I'm going to try my very darndest to, every time I go to cast on a pair of socks, just pull out my journal and write it down, so that way I can at least communicate with you guys for posterity, sort of like how long a pair of socks takes me to knit, for example, or being able to put them on Ravelry. Or if I lose the ball band, like for that one I didn't, but if I lose the ball band, I wrote down the colorway. So at least I can communicate that, because, you know, I don't like when I'm watching a podcast and the person is like, I bought it ages ago, I have no idea what color this is. And you're like, yeah, but I like it, and I'd really love to know. So I'm trying to avoid doing that to you guys. And so I am sort of like putting this out into the world as almost like an accountability thing, that I will in fact do my very best when it comes to socks to pay closer attention, which leads me actually to my works in progress, because I have 2 sock whips and a shawl that will be familiar to you all. So yeah, let's get into talking about works in progress. We're not talking about works in progress. 2 more things. Since last podcast, so about 3 weeks ago, I also knit a headband for my dad as a gift and a dotted raised shawl for my stepmom as a gift. It was knitted in worsted weight and knitted quite small, so it's more like a wrap it around once sort of a scarf thing. In worsted weight on a US, I think 9. So yeah, I worked on those pretty monogamously for about a week, in between the last two podcasts. I unfortunately don't have photos or footage because they were wrapped and sent, but just imagine for me a provisionally cast on and then Kitchener like tube of stockinette for your ear holes, and then a dotted raise in like that, what I knit the cowl out of, I frogged that and re-knit the dotted raise because I just didn't like the cowl. So yeah, in case you were wondering about that, that was not all the knitting that I finished over the last 3 weeks, but that is the knitting that is staying with me in my home for your reference. So yeah, so that's that. Let's talk actually now about works in progress. I'm closer to the camera as I perch so that I can grab my works in progress bags. Uno momento. Let's get all of these. Who do I want to talk about first? Let's talk about the one I did the least amount of work on, shall we? So this, I'm affectionately calling these socks my cozy toes socks. For no reason other than they're being knit in like a super toothy wool that's gonna be like super warm and cozy. So yeah, they're my cozy toes socks. I'm sure someone else has actually called their pattern that at some point in life. So if you're that person, sorry, I'm not trying to steal your idea. It's just, it's a pet name. Do you pet name your whips? I do. So that's what these are. I really hope you can see because the lighting today is very gray because it's snowy, but I've done the heel and I've done a fleagle heel. So these are being knit toe up, and then you increase to a certain number of stitches depending on your stitch count, and then you decrease those stitches by doing short rows. Actually, this is a better way of showing it. So where are the increases? The increases are here, and then you, on this row, start doing short rows like how you would do for a heel flap and gusset. When you do the heel flap, that little bit that comes from the flap that you do in short rows, that's what that is. And so instead of needing to pick up stitches, you are increasing and then you're decreasing by doing those short rows. So it fits, I would say, similarly to a heel flap and gusset, but in my opinion, ooh, I'm so sorry. That's not very ladylike of me. Yeah, so instead of picking up stitches, you're just sort of building it all while knitting the sock, which is really, in my opinion, enjoyable. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pop these on the sock blockers so that you have a better like visualization of what's happening here. And I literally had to steal those rainbow socks off of my partner's feet this morning to be like, hey, I'm filming a podcast and I need those back. And she was like, okay, I guess you can have them for now. So, boop, boop, boop. How much of a tangled mess is this about to be? Let's see, shall we? Okay, there we go. So these are knit in, what's the name? That company from Canada who's been making yarn for ages, Briggs & Little. This is knit in Briggs & Little Sport Weight Durasport, the one with the nylon in. And it's made in the colorway denim. And I also have the colorway rosewood. It's a red color that I'm gonna do a cuff. I'm gonna do a really long fold over cuff, and then I'm gonna do red socks with the blue fold over cuff. This is gonna be like a long-term sock project. I'm pretty much making these for utility reasons. We live in a cold climate. My toes are always cold, and I don't want to buy slippers, partially because I could make them, and no, 100% because I could make them. I just don't want to buy slippers. So instead I'm making myself some cozy socks. Obviously they're not slippers, they're socks, but I think that I would find these more comfortable than slippers for no reason other than I always wear socks, so why wouldn't I just knit myself warm socks? That's my logic, I'm sticking to it. I say it's gonna be a long-term sock project because I'm knitting 2 pairs of these so that my partner and I have matching ones, and because this yarn is a little bit slower to work with, it's sticky. I don't know how else to explain it, but like it comes off the ball like stickier than a superwash would. So it just takes that little longer, and it like, I don't know if you can see this, but it like curls on itself. Is that visible? Yeah, you can see that. It like curls on itself. So it's just like kind of almost like working with that aspect of the sock is just gonna take that little while longer. I mean, I'm past the heel on this one, and I think I'm gonna shoot myself in the foot a little bit, no pun intended, knitting that really long ribbing. So I might cheat and knit the leg a little bit longer, and then only knit the cuff a little bit longer than I normally would. So it's still a fold over cuff, but what's under the fold is stockinette and not ribbing. That's probably what I'm gonna end up doing. But yeah, so these are happening. In 3 weeks, I was about, I think about there. This is just so that I remember how many rounds I did for the foot and like the, this is marking the start of the leg. Just so that when I go to knit the second one, because again, I write no notes, I'm not shooting myself in the foot going, well, I really should have wrote notes or put stitch markers in or did something, anything to help myself. So I remembered that I would be annoyed with myself, so I'm putting stitch markers in to keep track of things like number of rounds, etc., etc. I have considered putting together a bit of a sock recipe of like a cuff down recipe, a toe up recipe, and like a choosing your heel for the type of sock that you're knitting. Almost like it would just be like a PDF that I would throw on Ravelry for like a few dollars. It wouldn't be free because I don't believe in free labor. I don't know how to gently put that, but I just won't do it. So I'm thinking about putting it together for a few dollars, just as like almost like a, hey, thank you for putting this together sort of a fee. It wouldn't be more than $3. Just to sort of have like a database of how I knit my socks. And in case you are curious about how to get a recipe that works for you and sort of like talk about the process. And frankly, the process is knitting a lot of socks. But if anyone would be interested in that sort of a pattern, let me know. If you think that there are enough heckin' plain vanilla sock patterns in the world that are already free and you think it would be a waste of my time, which I'm erring on that side if I'm honest, tell me also in the comments below. I won't take offense to it. I've just been thinking about like, oh, it would be nice to have this all in one place so that it's a little more easily accessible, even for myself, if I'm honest. So that's been kind of rolling around in the old noodle lately. Oh yeah, and that's in my project bag that Kat from Heather and Hops made for me as a gift. So that is that. Please don't go looking for a shop for project bags. She doesn't have one. Please don't bug her about it. It was a gift. This is another sock whip. So this, the last one I had on the needles since I think probably October. These are a new cast on. So I'm gonna take everything out here so that it's a little less chaotic. So this is, let me start off by saying, one of the prettiest things I think I own. This is yarn from, let's hold it up. So this is yarn from Area 51 Fibers. It is, I hope I'm holding that close and it's actually focusing. It is a hand-dyed, self-striping, that's her brand there, yarn. It's in the colorway Yuletide Cheer, and it is a 80% superwash merino, 20% nylon, 425 yards per 100 grams. So this is sock yarn, self-striping sock yarn. My partner and I placed this order in October, maybe it was November, and sort of like decided, oh, a couple colors will be for me, a couple colors will be for you. I knit them all, but like some of the sock colors are gonna be her socks and some of them will be mine. This was my Christmas cast on, and what we had decided to do was actually wrap them and put them under the tree. So it was just something like nice and fun to open for Christmas morning. And I'm so happy we did because I had no idea what they looked like. My partner wrapped them for me, and I was so pleasantly surprised with this yarn. It's truly stunning. It, I will say, is more saturated than I was expecting it to be, but I think that that's why I love it even more. Like, it's just so like poppy. So that's what that looks like. I did a cuff down because I cast on Christmas Day and I didn't want to fiddle with toe increases. I just sort of wanted to knit. So that's what I did. I literally only worked on this Christmas Day. This is all I picked up on Christmas Day. And you can tell because I knit quite a bit of it. And the heel is what I'm most excited about. I've never done this before, but I've seen so many people do it. Originally, I'm going to hold this up so you can see. Originally, I was going to knit the heel. Let's hide this heel so it's not. Originally, I was going to knit the heel out of this. And you may or may not be able to tell that this pink is different than the pink on the sock. This is a more bright bubblegum pink, and the sock is a more salmon flamingo pink, I think is what I would call that. And so I decided while I was knitting that I was like, no, I hand wound both of these balls. I think I did this on, because I opened this as my Christmas Eve present. We each opened one gift, and I wound it, I think, on Christmas Eve, but then I cast on Christmas morning. And I also wound this on Christmas morning in anticipation for needing it that day. It is Old Rusted Chair, Bubble Pop Electric, 20 grams of 75-25 Tough Sock. And I love this color. I actually bought Old Rusted Chair minis for all of the Area 51 fibers self-striping skeins that we got, because Area 51 does do mini skeins, but we had bought these already before I realized I should probably get mini skeins, and I was already looking at Old Rusted Chair for her just like speckly, pretty, amazing yarn, and I was like, ooh, I bet you she has minis, and I was right. She has like a literal rainbow of mini options, and so I was like, well, I don't see why not. So I got some that I thought would work. Some of them will work really well. This one just wasn't a winner, and that's okay. So what I'm gonna do is just put that aside for, you know, for another day, if you will. And instead, I decided I had knit about half of the heel with just good old Knit Pick Stroll white. And I was about to start going back the other way for my Fish Lips Kiss heel. And then I remembered that I have this Wild Atlantic yarns in this like teal blue color that I held with my Knitted In for my mittens. This is also a gift from Kat, a leftover that she had. So this is that color. And so I held it with the white and I made this. And I am so stoked. So it's this like teal, but kind of green. Like it's almost like a seafoam green, I think is probably what I would describe the color as. And I don't know, I just think that with these colors, this sagey teal green situation really works. I don't know. If you disagree, please don't tell me, because I'm over the moon excited about this color combination. So keep it to yourself. But I just think that that's something special. So that's what I'm doing there. These were both already eaten into skeins of yarn for multiple different projects. So how much yarn I've used, I do not know. If I will use it for the toe, I also don't know. Stay tuned for next episode. You'll see them then. My goal is to have these finished along with the shawl I'm about to show you by 2021 so that I can have Christmas socks for next year. I'm gonna be honest, I'll probably wear them all year round, but here we are. So that is that. Area 51 fibers. She does dyed to order and in stock pretty much at any point. If you want to buy self-striping yarn, you can on her website. She doesn't really do the in stock, there's only 30 of them, so if you don't get it by 501 you miss out sort of an update deal, which I appreciate because anxiety. So yeah, I would recommend, fellow Canadian. Really amazing. I like all the colors that we got. So yes, and if you're into nerdy themed yarn, I would doubly recommend her because I have a Doctor Who yarn, a Maleficent yarn, and yeah, I think she's an R2-D2. It's a great time. Okie dokie. So last but certainly not least is going to be my Adrift shawl. Lord of the Rings bag, as per usual. So this is, oh no, project bag down. Come back. So this is my Adrift shawl by Vera. It is almost done, yay! So I moved the stitch marker, started working on it yesterday. So today, I started working on it on Boxing Day. And I got that far from the yellow stitch marker to there. So I'm now on the last garter stitch section. So it goes from garter to moss stitch to garter to moss stitch, and it starts with garter. There's some eyelets in there. It's going to be an extremely long but not super deep shawl, which I've spoken about previously is an ideal sort of structure for shawls for me. And I'm about, I would say, a third of the way through the number of repeats I need to do for the garter, and then I'm gonna bind off and then it'll be done. So my goal this week is to work on this project. Excuse me, I've had so much junk food. My body is like, hey, a vegetable please, that'd be really great. So I apologize for my gassiness. But yes, so this is gonna be this week's project along with my Yuletide cheer socks in an effort. I just know myself, if I'm knitting something like a Yuletide cheer, red and green, Christmassy AF colorway, mid-January, I'm gonna put them down and never pick them back up again. So I'm gonna try to power through those bad boys. By power through, I mean work on them when I can and hopefully get them done. I'm not gonna force it, but you know what I mean. And then this bad boy, I want to try to finish before the new year, mostly because I've had it on the needle since October 1st, and I really just want to wear it. Like for no reason, like it's not an unenjoyable knit, it's mindless, it's garter, it's a good time. It is literally just something I want to get off of my needles so that I can wear it. It's already from the weight of it while knitting, it's already opening up really nicely. I was worried my gauge was too tight, but it's not gonna be. It's gonna be really nice. So I don't know if I've loosened up as I've knitted it or what, but it's just starting to drape really beautifully. It's in merino. It's all the things that like I'm ready to be wearing this. And so I'm just gonna sort of put a little bit of focus on this one because once this is done and my socks are done, the only two things I'm gonna have left on the needles are things that I'm now considering long-term projects. So I'm gonna have my Brio garter wedge shawl, which I showed 2 episodes ago. I'm not gonna pick it out. I haven't touched it since, but it is my scrappy project. And I'm gonna have my long-term Cozy Toes socks on the needles, but I'm gonna have those on the needles for a while. So yeah, that's sort of where I'm sort of at heading into 2022. I'm going to wind up my yarn for my Andrea Mowry weekender sweater, and regardless of if this is off the needles or not, I will be casting that on New Year's weekend, just because I'm really excited to start it and I've already swatched for it. So I'd like to at least sort of get the ribbing started on that. And yeah, I'm sort of just I'm in a good place in terms of like my stress level as it relates to my knitting going into 2022, which is refreshing. And I didn't actually know where I was going to be at in that regard. So that really makes me feel good about sort of what I've accomplished. And yeah, I guess that sort of brings us into our knitical thinking section. So I'm gonna organize myself a little bit better here and we'll get into that. It's gonna be a short one this time. And then we're gonna talk about content I've been enjoying, etc., etc. So now is the time for those of you who are only here for the knitting to go ahead and exit out if you're not interested in me talking about life and whatever. And if you are interested, amazing. Thank you so much for sticking around. Let's do that. Okie doke. It's knitical thinking time. I might pick up a project. I might not. I haven't quite decided. But yes, so this is my knitical thinking, which is a play on critical thinking. If you've ever written like a critical thinking essay in 6th grade where you had to like analyze something. That's sort of what I'm doing here. And I mentioned 6th grade because it very much is like a high level, what I've been mulling over for the past couple of weeks between episodes as it pertains to the craft of knitting. For now, this might expand into like more general societal thinking, but for now it's literally just me having to think about how knitting makes me feel, which is fluffy a little bit, and also a little bit like, it's not unhinged, but it is a little bit like, wow, you're thinking a lot about a thing that's meant to bring you joy. And I think that's why I want to do it, because this is a craft that both brings me joy and causes me anxiety. And I know that I can't be the only one. So I'm sort of like unpacking that publicly. And whether you choose to join me and stick around in these parts of the video or not, thank you for listening either way. If you're rolling your eyes while watching this, me too. Like, me too. I don't know. But yeah, so basically what I've been thinking of lately is, if you follow me on Instagram, you know that the other day, I did a little bit of a rundown of my 2022 Ravelry queue. And the reason that I did this is I was sort of putting it together and I went, okay, I have, again, and this brings me back to last week's knitical thinking. Once more, I have more sweater quantities than I have time to knit them in a year. Why I've decided that within a year is a good metric, I'm not sure. Frankly, the new year has never really meant much to me by way of like resolutions or life-changing choices or anything like that. I've never really been that kind of a person. But for whatever reason, when it comes to my knitting, I'm sort of benchmarking each year. I started knitting in August of 2019. And I got most serious with it. And by serious, I mean like actually learning what yarn weights and needle sizes and things to start using for projects. Probably during the pandemic, like going into 2020, was probably around the time that I started like paying more attention to my knitting. And since then, I've gotten confident in some things and I have shied away from other things. And I've really sort of solidified myself in the world of knitting as it pertains to my adult life. Like, I anticipate, barring any like horrible, my hands stop working situations. And I say horrible because it would be horrible for me. Barring anything like that, I anticipate knitting forever, right? For as long as I'm able. And so for whatever reason, the yearly calendar as we ascribe to it, it seems like a good enough way to sort of track my knitting, right? I guess. And so I sort of, again, I'm not very great with keeping track of things. I don't follow my Ravelry projects as well as I should, but I'm trying this thing where I make a queue and I actually click cast on this project when I've casted it on. And Ravelry has a slew of issues and I do not like it as a platform. And I do not like that it has given me headache issues in the past. I do not like the way that their management ownership has dealt with the fact that they have harmed people with their website. I don't love any of that. I'm going to be very upfront and honest with you when I say that I do not have the space, my like mental capacity to find another platform that works better or as well for me. I'm not in it. I don't have the ability to do that right now. If you have suggestions, absolutely leave them in the comments. Beautiful, please do. Right now I'm using the platform not because I like it, but because it has a function for me that I currently need. And so I made this queue. I made this queue of about 15, I think, patterns. 5 or so are accessory or sock patterns and the rest are garments. So about 10, maybe 11 garments. And I sort of mentally set them up from January to March, April to June, July to September, and then October to December. October to December being very loose, very unsure. And there were still patterns that I didn't put on that list that I have sweater quantities for, that I have every intention of knitting. So this is very much just my 2022, let's see if I can follow this. I posted about it on my Instagram stories. It's now a highlight labeled 2022 on my Instagram if you're curious, like watching me sort of go through that process. And I've sat with that for about 5 days since I've made that, and I'm reflecting on it. I'm knittically thinking about it, if you will. And I think it is ultimately going to be a good tool for me, but I worry if by making myself a list, I've sort of bound my hands a little bit, and I've said, okay, if you don't follow this list, then you've failed an arbitrary thing that you set in place for yourself, and so therefore you were bad at knitting. What? I don't know. But this is why I'm doing this, right? This is inside of my brain. So I say, okay, I've made myself this list in order to say, while I'm knitting a project and I look up at my yarn wall, I'm not going, ooh, that's pretty, I want to cast that on. Ooh, what about this? I want to cast that on. I know that while I'm knitting that, this is what I'm meant to be knitting, and I will get to that project that I'm oohing and ahhing about at this point because I've already planned for it. That's why I made the list, right? To sort of quell that I must cast on all the things all the time because everything is pretty. Because we know yarn is pretty. We know new projects new patterns are gonna come out. We know all of these things are true. So what I'm trying to sort of prevent is that like knee-jerk reaction to need to do the thing. So far, so good. Haven't cast on my weekender yet, and I've been itching to do it for months. So there's something to be said about this, but there's just like that in the back of my head concern that it's going to do the opposite, and it's going to make me feel, if I don't follow this, that I've failed in some way. Saying it out loud sounds, what's the word I'm looking for? It sounds like I'm being mean to myself, and I don't want to do that. So ultimately, I'm leaving my knittical think as having a cue for the year sounds like a good idea for me at this point in time. I'm curious if anyone else has similar feelings to me about whips and wanting to cast on all the things. A personal like rule of following for me is a sock project, a small project, and a sweater or shawl project that has morphed into a sock, a small project, a shawl, and a sweater, which I don't hate, but that's just sort of, and with my goal of finishing some things sooner than others, always sort of being on the sock and the sweater, and then the shawl and the smaller project tend to like just happen when they happen. That's sort of how my brain has been going lately, and I'm sort of letting that happen. But I'm curious if anyone has like, do you also have number of whip limits that you put on yourself? Do you plan for the year, for the month, at all? Does that work for you? Do you feel like if you had a plan, you'd be a little more in tune with your intentions of making? Do you feel like if you had a plan, it would derail your intentional making, and by virtue of having a plan, you're no longer doing things intentionally because you're not listening to what you want to do in the moment? Possible, right? So yeah, I leave you with that. And I do want to mention the year of 2022, my partner and I have sort of like chosen a theme for the year rather than like a resolution, because we don't love resolutions. Our theme for the year is intentionality. And so with that, we are going to sort of go about each month with a new intention. January will be the intention of no alcohol. February will be the intention of no purchases that are not essential purchases, so no yarn purchases, and for her, no like D&D mini painting purchases. Those are our respective hobbies, things like that. So we're kind of moving into this year with new intentions to sort of ground ourselves a little bit. Things have been tough with the pandemic, and feeling grounded is a challenge all the time, let alone when the world is so different. So we think that that might be a good way to sort of like center ourselves and our relationship and what we sort of want for ourselves. So that's what we're sort of doing. And that is why I think I made that sort of cue list situation, because if anything, what my goal is with my knitting is to do it with intention. Yep, that's it. That's my story. Hope you enjoyed it. And without further ado, let's have a little bit of a chat about media, I guess is a good way of putting it. We finished, what's the show called? That show with the magic ladies. Wheel of Time. Thank you. We finished the first season of Wheel of Time, and that's on Amazon Prime. And it is loosely based off of the series by the same name. And I say loosely because I didn't really realize it was loosely based. My partner does this thing where she will Google the actors or the story or what the book was like versus what we're watching, and like sort of like feed me tidbits of information, because I very much like to know what's happening. I think I've talked about this before. I like spoilers. So we were watching Wheel of Time. We finished the first season. I think that my like rating for it would be like probably 4 out of 5 stars in terms of how I like to consume media. The reason I say that is because we got so much accomplished in one season. They went so far. Their character development was light speed, okay? And I was expecting them, so without spoilers, essentially these characters journey to a location and then meet a character that is like talked about from the beginning as like this, ooh, big scary bad. We did that all in 8 episodes. Mind you, these episodes were about an hour long, so that's like 8 hours of content, but we did a lot. And by the time we were done watching it, I was like, how many books did that just span? Because I was barely expecting to get to like the midpoint of the season by the end of the season, if that makes sense. Like I was expecting the progression to be where they were in episode 4 or 5. That's where I was expecting them to be at the end of the season. So it just felt like a whirlwind of holy crap all at once. And while it was extremely well done, the budget is unreal. The way they've done magic is really cool. The character development was fine and lovely. You love to hate a lot of the characters, which I think is clever, because I think the point is that all of them are flawed. It's a good time. But yeah, it just is, I'm excited for the next season, but I'm not like dying that it's not out yet. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so what we decided to do is start watching The Witcher, which has two seasons now on Netflix. And basically what we've done is now inserted ourselves in 2 similar but different magical worlds. And so by the time we get to season 2 of the Wheel of Time, whenever it comes out, I think that we're both going to be confused about what is canon in each world in terms of how the magic systems work and stuff. Maybe not, because they call things differently and the setting is like that little bit different, that we should be okay. But it's kind of like reading 2 books at once and then trying not to mess up the characters. That's sort of how it feels a little bit. The Witcher, however, so far, 5 out of 5, a great time. Like really great. And I've heard that season 2 is even better. I don't know if it's because the lore in The Witcher is more akin to D&D than Wheel of Time is, and so I'm just like enjoying the visual representation of what like I imagine happening in D&D games. That could be part of why I'm enjoying it so much, but it's a really good time. Yeah, so I do recommend that. Like so far, 5 out of 5. I haven't finished the first season, but we'll see. And then last but not least, if you're a Critical Role fan, who's your favorite Campaign 3 character? I'm just curious. Mine for season 2 or campaign 2 was Jester, and my campaign 1 favorite is probably a mix between, I loved Keyleth and her whole story, and if you dislike Keyleth, I don't want to hear it, because frankly, no Keyleth slander on this channel. But I think the ties between like Keyleth and Grog and Pike together as a friendship as like a favorite. Not necessarily the characters individually, they're great, don't get me wrong, but like that dynamic was top tier good. So yeah, so I would say Keyleth and then Jester. And then I think for campaign 3, my favorite right now is probably Orem. And I think that that is going to be a controversial opinion. My partner doesn't like Orem very much, mostly because he's a little bit, like, boring is harsh, but he's just a guy. And if you've watched any of the, like, campaign, like, in-between shows of, like, Talks Machina or any one-shots or anything like that, like, Liam's like, at one point, I'm gonna play just a guy. And I feel like he's doing that, but I feel like he's doing that in a way where Orem will rip our hearts into multiple tiny bitty pieces and eat them himself. With Orem, like, I feel like he's not giving us everything. He says he's just a guy, but really he probably has some tragic backstory that we're just not privy to yet. And I like that they're leaning into, so mild spoilers, if you're not caught up, you can skip this. But I think they're kind of leaning into connecting the campaigns a little bit. Like, Orem knows Keyleth and Vex and Percy, and they're just sort of like letting this world commingle in a way that you would expect them to, because campaign 2, the story of campaign 2 is not one that lends to everyone knowing who the Mighty Nine were, right? Ultimately, they end their story and no one has any idea that they saved the world. Whereas in campaign 1, everyone knows, right? There's a holiday in Byroden for the bears because of Vex. Like, there's just so much more about the world of Exandria that is intrinsically tied to campaign 1, that I really appreciate that they're not trying to shy away from that anymore. And I understand why they did for campaign 2. They kind of had to sort of say, hey, this is not a campaign 1 continuation. You're getting new characters and a new story and a new continent, like, hard line drawn in the sand, different situation, right? To sort of prepare the fans for that. And I think that was a really good decision on their part. But I'm really loving this, like, hey, we've made a MCU level freaking puzzle and sometimes the pieces are going to touch, and I think that they're doing a really good job with that. So anyway, yeah, I'm curious what everyone's favorite character for C3, if you had to pick one, not I like this character for this reason, this character for this reason, because I could sit here singing the praises of every last character, including Travis's 2 at this point, and I bet you it's going to be 5 by the end of the campaign. But I'm curious, if you had to pick one, if you had to do it, who would it be? Yep, I think that's it. I'm done talking now. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for listening to my babble about knitting and life, I guess. And that's it. That's my story. I'll be back. I'm gonna go with every 2 weeks. Seems to be like a good pace, seems to be like a good amount of content in that time frame. And if you have any questions, any suggestions for shows I should watch, or, oh my goodness, shows I should watch, yarn I should knit with, patterns I should look into, etc., please drop me a comment down below. Find me on Instagram, do whatever it is that works for you, because I would love to be fiber friends. And once again, thank you so much for joining me on the Sip and Knit podcast. I hope you enjoyed your tea and knitting time with me, and I will see you in the next one.